Hey, what's up, guys? Recording the intro to this while I'm sitting in traffic on my way home from work, trying to fit in as much of this as I can. You guys know my busy schedule, so might as well record my introductory thoughts here on the road, and I can get to editing the rest of it when I get home from work later on. Rewind like a month ago to when I made that video with sort of my criticism, recommendations about the quests and quest design and progression in Escape from Tarkov. I sort of outlined the 4 or 5 kind of basic requirements that every quest should fulfill in a game that has quests, has tasks, things like that. For starters, it should contribute to the universe, the player experience, the story in some way. It should enrich the story, it should enrich the universe, it should enrich your experience in a positive way. Even if it's challenging, it should be enriching to the story and to the universe. It needs to make logical sense in the framework of the universe. You need to be able to ask yourself or the theoretical characters, why am I doing this, and have that make sense to you as a player. You need to make sure that you have clear and obvious requirements outlined for what's expected of you for completing the quest. The who, what, where, why, when, all of that needs to be clear to the players to have a well-designed quest. There needs to be no ambiguity in that aspect. You need to give me a reason why I should care also. How is what I'm going to do going to affect me? How is it going to affect the other players, the other characters, the other NPCs? Why should I care? Why should I do this for you? It's not just for 100 gold, and a +1 strength fucking Warhammer, right? Like, there needs to be some motivation outside of monetary, in my opinion. So I also outlined some kind of important distinctions between what I thought were compelling and rewarding challenges that make up good quests, and contrasted those with challenges that I thought were arbitrary or superfluous in some way, like they're just filler content, like they just need to add in a dozen check boxes in each quest to make it seem more full. And I outlined those, and I thought I did a decent job explaining the basic kind of preliminary thoughts on what the distinction between those two sets of challenges are. So given that a couple days ago 11.7 was dropped on us, and there was a decent amount of quest changes that were made, how did they do? Did they listen to my feedback or anybody else in the community's feedback? Did they take any of our feedback to heart and make changes? Did they take any steps forward, any steps back? Let's dive into some of the specific examples and see what progress was made either way. And let's see if we're going in the right direction or not. Let's just hop into it, shall we? So I'm not really sure if the video that I made last month was the driving force behind the found in raid requirement, but I will say that I was initially extremely excited to see that the found in raid requirement was added to at least some of the quests. I very quickly realized that the heart of what I was trying to convey with my proposal to at least the proposed changes to the debut quest was lost with the actual resulting implementation of the found in raid requirement. Now, perhaps I wasn't clear, but my intentions for the requirement to collect the gun off of scavs was to try to get around the cheesing of the item fetch quests by simply buying your way through them by using the flea market or traders. Now, the way that the quest was originally designed and the way that it ended up being changed to, they both allowed players to get around different aspects of the quest to make it easier for them to complete in a way that sort of defeats the purpose of the quest itself. And now, in my opinion, the heart of the debut quest, as I understand it, was to motivate players to kill scavs, to loot their gear, and successfully extract with that gear to then deliver to Prapor to prove that you're, worth your metal or whatever. Now, before, you could just turn in any applicable gun, no matter where it came from. And at the beginning of 11.7, you could technically pick up the gun in raid, die with it, and then purchase the gun on the flea market or from a trader, separately and turn that over. Now, within the first 2 days of the patch going live, a few bugs were found with the introduction of the found in raid mechanics, so some of the quests removed it altogether, while some quests still have it, but I'm sad to see that their actual implementation has resulted in my opinion, what's an even worse experience for players, and I'll explain why. So there's two relevant issues here. One is the requirements of the quest themselves and the way that those requirements are fulfilled. Now, both of these issues, in my opinion, could be solved by properly implementing the Found in Raid feature, which I'll propose shortly. Seemingly wanting to prevent players from cheesing the quest by buying the guns, it looks like Battlestate attempted to remedy this by adding the Find in Raid requirement, which seems to mean that you need to pick up an instance of that item inside of a raid, which at least requires you to enter the raid after the start of the quest and find the thing you're supposed to find. But it doesn't require that you actually turn in that item to fulfill the quest. So this poses a couple problems for players. First, if you know that the quest is coming in the future and you decide to pick up the items proactively in preparation for the start of that future quest, you actually won't get credit for it because the quest wasn't active when you picked it up. You're able to turn in the items that you grabbed previously, but you still have to separately find them again inside of a raid, even though you already did. So before, players who were forward-thinking and filled up their stash with future quest items in early levels, they were rewarded by being able to complete the quests almost instantly because they fulfilled the requirements before. But now these players are punished because they basically had taken up all of that valuable stash space occupied by these quest items that are essentially useless to them now, and they can't even sell them on the flea market because people you can't use them as they weren't found in a raid. So it's a lose-lose for everybody involved. Now, I can't help but see this from my software engineering perspective. And what stands out to me here is that the heart of this issue is that the fulfillment of the quest requirements appears to be tied to an open instance of the quest itself. Now, I have a proposal that actually kills a few birds with one stone and also has the added benefit of setting the foundation for some potentially, interesting quest requirements in the future that I'll get into in just a second. So as an engineer who lives in an object-oriented world, the solution to this problem stands out to me as one that can be solved with simple object-oriented principles. Now, right now, the responsibility of requiring that an item was found in the raid lies on an open instance of the quest, marking that the requirement as fulfilled when an applicable item is picked up inside of a raid by a player, but it's actually separate from turning in the item itself. Now, from an object-oriented architectural standpoint, this kind of hurts my brain, as it's sort of an indirect and error-prone way to make that determination. Now, one that we've already seen manifest in actual in-game bugs and workarounds that are obvious to all of us at this point. So let's step back and figure out what the base challenge is here for this quest and how it could be solved. The ultimate requirement here is that we want to require players to loot a gun off of a dead scav. If I, as a game designer or as a software engineer, wanted to require that someone turn in an item to me that they looted from a scav in raid, I would think that I would need to build that information into the item itself. Now, I need to caveat all of this with the fact that I have no idea how this is actually implemented. Never seen their code. I don't know what their APIs are like. I don't know if any or all of this, what I'm about to propose exists in the game already. But here's kind of how I would theoretically do it. And maybe this will either give them some ideas or, shed some light on what the problem is in a different way, or potentially might teach some of you guys some, interesting, game software development principles along the way here. So first, let's conceptualize some interesting metadata about items in the game that could be tracked and used for all sorts of really cool game mechanics. Knowing the history of an item, how many raids it's been in, where it came from, how many times it's changed hands, all this information could be extremely interesting from both an analytics perspective for the developers, from a gameplay perspective for players, and as a quest mechanic perspective for both. Now, the origin of an item could be tracked with some sort of enumeration that indicates whether the item spawned in the environment, spawned in the hands of an AI character, spawned in the hands of a player scav, or if it spawned on a trader, skier or therapist to be sold. Now, anytime an item is brought into a raid, whether it's taken in by, players or spawns in on a scav or in the environment, a counter could be incremented tracking how many raids that item has been in. Now, the same could be done every time an item is sold on the flea market, owned by a player by having the item in their inventory outside of a raid, etc. So much could be done with this information that benefits both the developers and the players. I'd be really surprised if they haven't already implemented much or all of this already. If you wanted to require that a gun was looted from a scav on customs, all you need to do is ensure that the item's map spawn property was equal to customs, and that the item's AI spawn was not equal to none. This indicates that the items spawned on a scav on customs. Now, all sorts of cool quest mechanics could be created using this data. Like, if you wanted to prove, quote unquote, that you killed Killa, you could, have to bring one of the traders any of his signature items, like helmet, gun, rig, armor. Now, this is kind of cool because if you went in with a group, you could all work together to kill him, and then you could split up his loot, each taking a different piece of his equipment as their own proof, and all fulfilling the quest, even though it was technically one person that might have made the killing blow. Now, if you're a solo player, on the other hand, you get to keep everything yourself, and you get rewarded for that. And what you can do is choose which of his items is the least useful for you and keep the rest to use yourself or sell or whatever. Now, if he happens to go full Tarkov and blow himself up, with a grenade or die walking through barbed wire or something, or if another player kills him but bleeds out afterwards and you come across the aftermath unlooted, you can play the role of a scavenger here, picking up the remains. If the mission is an ordered hit on the scav boss, does it really matter if you killed him? Prapor just wants him dead and wants you to prove that he's dead. Now, from an implementation standpoint on the software side of things, all you need to do is whenever an item is going to be turned in for a quest, you just need to check that the gun, rig, or armor, its AI spawn value is equal to Killa. Now, if you happen to kill him yesterday and the news never made it to Prapor in the last 24 hours, it's not your fault he's out of the loop. You already did the dirty work, the hit's been taken care of, so it shouldn't be required that you do it again simply because of the timing of the quest. Now, maybe Peacekeeper wants to start clearing out the riffraff and labs. He could require you to bring him 3 guns from raiders. If you wanted to ensure that it was looted by this particular person in a raid rather than sold on the flea market or dropped by a friend to cheese the quest, all you need to do is check that the item's market sale count was 0 and that the owner count was 1. That proves that the person got it from in a raid themselves. You could check that the AI spawn was a raider, and you know that they didn't buy it and it wasn't dropped by a friend. Now, from a different perspective, it could be cool as a player to see the history of an item. If the UI were to show you some of these new values, to know the origin was that, it spawned on Killa, or that it was purchased from Skier a week ago and that it was used in 100 raids. It'd actually be really cool to have an item that's been used for a long period of time, if it has history and it survived, the hell of Tarkov for a long time. So much gear is lost to being uninsured or sold to traders that it poofs and is never seen again. It's got to be exceedingly rare to have a gun that's seen 100 raids, or something like that. Like I said, that would be kind of an interesting trophy to have, a gun that you've repaired a million times and, has been with you through thick and thin, or has been with 20 different people but still exists in the universe. It hasn't just, been deallocated forever and you'll never see it again. Like I said, it's, to me, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm a nerd. That stuff's kind of cool. My major point here isn't that these ideas I'm coming up with are the right ones or they should be taken, verbatim and thrown into the game. I'm just trying to kind of conceptualize what sorts of things can exist theoretically and conceptually in the game to make it richer, to make it more meaningful, to make it make more sense, and how, some simple software design principles can help them do that. So the second issue I wanted to touch on here, which is something that I delved into in my previous video on the subject, was my criticisms of many of the quests in the game for having countless examples of quest requirements that were completely arbitrary in their reasoning and difficulty. Shooter Born in Heaven requiring 4 headshots on PMCs at greater than 130 meters on each of 4 different maps was one of those. And I explained how the distance was not only difficult to estimate given the general inability of players to measure distance accurately in the game given our lack of tools, but it was also arbitrary. I outlined a pretty big change on the quest that, at least in my opinion, fulfilled the heart of the quest as outlined in the flavor text, as well as how the distance of 130 meters was simply unrealistic on at least some of the maps given their layouts and the general lack of PMC traffic on those maps at the time. Now, the only change that was made to this quest was the reduction of the distance requirement from 130 meters to 100 meters. Now, in terms of steps in the right direction, this was probably the smallest one they could have taken, but I guess I'll take that over some of the other changes that were made to some other quests. Punisher Part 3 was originally kill 35 scavs on customs. Now, while sort of boring, this quest at least made sense, and honestly even more so when there used to be a time limit, if I recall correctly. Although the time limit should have been, in my opinion, in-game time and not real-world time, but that's a different story altogether. When the patch first dropped, the requirements were changed to kill 35 scavs on customs using the AKS-74U within 40 meters between 4 a.m. and 11 a.m. Why? He says, make sure the bastards see their death coming. So if you want them to see their death coming, why am I going to kill them at 5 a.m. when it's dark outside rather than at fucking high noon? If you want them to see their death coming, it can be with any gun, right? Why the shittiest AK in the game? The gun and time requirements make no sense, and the distance requirement only makes a small amount of sense. Now, this quest literally took every criticism I had about the quest design that I outlined in my previous video and doubled down on each one. The only way it could be worse was if it was on PMCs instead of scavs. I mean, hell, there's even a meme that's been going crazy on Reddit and on Twitter and, in Discords and everything about how poorly designed this quest is and how arbitrary and annoyingly difficult it was. Now, Shootout Picnic now requires that you kill scavs in woods wearing a balaclava. Now, I actually like the idea that, you would want to remain anonymous, so you need to cover your face, otherwise they'll, be on to Prapor and they'll know he was behind it. That's a cool change, and it makes sense in the lore of the world. Although they learned their lesson the hard way that items like this that are required for quests shouldn't be able to sell out from traders. Now, all of the quests that require you to do things like mark fuel tanks, find a gold pocket watch, or that box of graphics cards in the customs office, the letter on the dead messenger, these are all really awesome in my opinion. They add to the richness of the world, the story, and the motives. All of these quests don't suffer from the find and raid implementation bullshit or the issue of people buying out the items from traders and making a killing on the flea market in the first few days of the wipe. Anytime items are required for quests, this model should be followed. It's almost like whoever it was that designed those initial quests, the older quests where, like the gold pocket watch or the graphics cards ones, I feel like that person is not making the quests now. I don't know if it's the same person, if it's the same team, if it's the same group, whoever's responsible for it, but I think they were onto something with those quests. And a lot of the new quests, they just seem like filler at this point. There's been a ton of other quest changes as well, and I need to do some more thinking and playing to see how they feel. I've only been playing for 2 days on this patch, but overall I think that Battlestate still has a bunch of work to do on their quest design philosophy to bring them up to par. Good quests don't require more development time, they don't require more development effort, they're not harder to implement, and there's no technical reason why we can't get better quests in the same amount of time that we have the quests that we have now. The issue here is purely philosophical and design-based. I'm going to defer to my original video that I made a month ago to reinforce my thoughts and opinions on what they need to do to improve. See you guys out there.